I've gotten so spoiled by Nick. All right, guys. Good morning. Good morning. Thank you for joining us for our Selling Condos training course this Monday. I wanted to thank Amy Prater for joining us as a lending specialist who lends on condos and is one of the ones that many agents lean on here in Kansas City. So thank you, Amy, for joining us. She'll go in through some of the lending stuff here in just a second. So if I know we've got some seasoned agents on here and y'all have worked with condos before, came across one or two. It's one of those things, just like real estate, it's always changing. No matter how long you've been in the business, you still get to come across things that are new and different. So let's start with just some general showing tips. And by all means, if others have things that they'd like to contribute, please jump in and share those as well. Again, I apologize. I don't know if you heard or not. We have a little construction going on in the office right now, so you might hear a little bit of that. My apologies, but okay. So let's start with talking about some tips for showing. And some of this will seem very basic and like, why is she sharing this? And yet I shared it with an agent recently that was showing condos for the first time or one of the first times, and she was so grateful. So my first tip would be to preview. So go out and preview the condos that you're going to be showing to your client ahead of time. And the reason I think that this is so very important is that you're able to, and this sounds silly, but find those lock boxes. And you're able to go and that sounds silly, finding the lock boxes, but when you show condos, you will often go to a building and there may be anywhere from 1 to 8 lock boxes that you need to be able to identify which one is for the unit you're actually showing. Sometimes the agents will tape their business card to it so that you'll know it's for their listing. So that might be a way. The other piece of it too, guys, sometimes is, Amanda, you're supposed to speak. Okay, sorry about that. Technology. So sometimes also it's locating it. So in your showing instructions, it will say, the lockbox is located on the south gate near the bench. And it takes time sometimes to look, and it sounds very silly, but it's also somewhat embarrassing when you can't find it and you're running all over the complex trying to identify it. So that's one benefit to previewing ahead of time too, is just locating those lockboxes. Another is, if you haven't and are not familiar with that building, understanding where the amenities are is super important. I can't tell you the number of times when you're showing and your client says, oh, it says it has a workout facility and it has a pool. Where can we go look at those? And especially if you're not comfortable in this arena, in the condo world, being able to quickly say, oh, yep, that's on the second floor. We'll jump down after we see these other two. We can go down and I'll show you. It's right around the corner over here. So looking for the amenities, whether that be the workout storage is another amenity that I would say is very helpful for you to identify and be able to show readily to a client, because if their unit comes from with storage, they kind of want to know what that looks like. The other piece with previewing them ahead of time is you're able to get a feel for the timing and how long it'll take you to walk through the building. I know most of us have gotten good at our residential single family, where you can pretty much time, I need about a half hour in each house, or this is what the windows look like. With condo buildings, depending on how many units in that building you're showing and how many amenities there are, it's good to kind of be able to space out your timing so you don't get super far behind if some of them are occupied, because going through a condo doesn't take any time at all. Like 700 square feet is not hard to walk through, and it doesn't take a whole lot of time, especially if you already know where the lockbox is and you can quickly walk in and go up the elevator to where you need to be. And yet, if you are showing multiple amenities in that building, you've got to work in that time. So anybody else have anything that they would share about showing condos? Parking, yes. Okay, yeah, that's another for in your previewing, understanding if there's parking included, which parking spot it is. It is a very commonly asked question. Okay, this one includes parking. Do you know what spot it is? And again, I think that just would being able to point to that quickly by previewing it the day before allows for your client to feel like, oh, she really knows, or he really knows what they're doing, because she was able to walk me directly to where the amenities are and knew where the parking spot was. The other piece is you can also figure out where the different buildings are. I have very good friends I showed one time, and parking to show is something to consider too. And often if you can and you feel comfortable having your client join you in your car, so maybe meeting, consolidating vehicles and then touring is helpful, because finding parking and paying for it on the street can be one thing. But yeah, showing really good friends condos, and we all load back up in the car, and then we literally, the next one we could have walked across the street to, but the way that the directions worked was a little funny. So super encourage you to preview ahead of time. Let's talk a little bit about pricing and value. So when you're running your comps, you're trying to get an understanding of how to price one unit versus another unit. And again, in some of these buildings, unit 109 is the same floor plan as unit 709. And so how is it that you are able to determine the value and the difference in value? So one of those things, and Amy can speak to this too here in a bit too, because I'm sure she has great insight on it, but it does make a difference what level the unit is on. Mm-hmm. And so and we all probably go, okay, yes, the high rise that's on the 18th floor is going to have more value tied to it than the unit that's on the 3rd floor. We get that. But it really does make a difference what level the unit is on, partly because of street noise, security. So if you are on a 2nd level and people can see into the unit, that's going to bring the value down for a consumer. So those would be obvious ones that I would share on level. The other thing is, if you are showing condos, or like Quality Hills, one that I would point to, if they do that main level unit might actually have some value in it compared to a 4th floor unit or a 3rd floor unit if they've got animals. Oh, yeah. So that would be something to take into consideration maybe when you're listing it, to make sure that you're pointing that out to people, like, hey, how great you can walk directly out of your unit into the grass to relieve your animal on a cold winter day, kind of a thing. So that would be the other piece. Amy, would there be anything else level wise that you would add on value?
The view.
Yeah. Yep.
Is one for sure, because I get when I look at those appraisals and it's it's something in the same building, but one's on the 3rd, they use a comp that's in the same building. A view is an adjustment in the appraisal.
Yeah, and I would say I've seen before where view is affected, what direction it's facing. Yeah. So if that unit is facing with a nice city view versus a highway view, that makes a huge difference.
Or the building across, like the next building, so all you're doing is looking at brick.
Exactly. So like, I know, like, and that makes a difference. So some of it is height, and then also like if you're that up to the 3rd floor staring directly into another building, that affects your price.
And a balcony is a big one.
Oh, that's a great point. Yes, the outdoor space is huge for so many consumers. Will start with that being a must-have, and then sometimes that changes, but that's a big difference in the value. I would say on the view too, guys, if you have one that's facing east, and so you're getting that morning sun and then it's dark in the evening, or one that's facing west, like just like when you sell a house and you're thinking about the heat and how hot it gets the unit, or something of that sort, or how useful that balcony is if it's going to be a gazillion degrees because it's getting the afternoon sun just pelting it, kind of a thing. Any other thoughts on level? I know Amanda lives downtown and is there anything else on level or view to add? No,
as long as there's an elevator, I think it's best to be higher.
Yeah. Another point would be your bed and bath count, obviously, but that's going to and even your 1.5 baths, that just like when in resale, just like in single family. I was going to touch on parking. We talked about that before. So parking is something, whether it's included in the price of the HOA dues each month, and there's a parking spot included, whether there's a parking spot available for lease through the building. So the building's connected to a parking where you can get parking, but because you're in that building, that makes a difference in value. And then what the cost of that parking is.
Some of them I noticed when we were shopping for a buyer were covered or uncovered, or within a secure gate, but it wasn't under a roof.
Oh,
But
that's a
then they
great
have
point.
an option to pay more money to be, like, you drive underneath the building and you're completely secured.
That's a great point with the parking. So it makes a difference too, and what to be pointing out to your clients and showing them as well. Amanda was sharing whether it's secured or unsecured, covered or uncovered does make a difference too. And those things should be listed in the MLS, and or if you've got access to where you can pay additional to get a covered spot. Some buildings will have wait list on those parking as well. So it might not be something you have initially available to you, and yet you can get on a wait list. So when one opens up, you've got the ability to. I mean, I've sold one at Churchill in which the parking spot was right outside the door from the elevator. And it was one in which it was kind of, you parallel parked into it, kind of sort of, you pulled into it. But that was a value because my client said, look at all the other spots. They're super narrow. And this one's right by the door. That increased the value of that unit in some senses, even if it's just in the consumer's mindset. Amy, did you want to add anything as far as parking goes?
Well, not as parking, but what you were talking about on the HOA dues. It's crazy how wide, like a 1,200 square foot unit in this building and a 1,200 square foot building in this unit could have $300 a month difference in the HOA. So it's important to know exactly like everything that HOA due covers. Because sometimes when I'm even looking at the MLS, you would think that it would list everything that it covers and it doesn't. So
Yeah.
I think that's odd.
As
we're sitting here, I'm trying to think of other things.
Yeah, so no amenities are also on my list of here, like when you're looking at your value, like what amenities are included. So some of those obvious ones we touched on, a pool, that can be a big difference for some clients. Workout facility, a doorman makes a big difference sometimes, right? Or if it's secured access to the building makes a difference, right? And as Amy's pointed out, sometimes those will be listed, and let me see if I can share my screen. Sometimes those will be listed, guys, for us in the MLS. So you'll scroll down here to the bottom and it's going to say exactly what's included in your HOA dues. So amenities, like let's talk a little briefly about the difference there. So amenities, you guys, you're probably, I don't know if there's been times you're like, why does amenities say one thing and HOA dues say something different? Amenities mean that it would be available to you in the building. HOA dues means it's included in the amount you're already paying. So there might be some times that you see something listed under amenities, but then the HOA doesn't actually include that. It would be an additional payment that the client could pay to have access to. In those amenities, like, so building maintenance is one piece to include in that. And is that like the exterior of the building? Is that, that's a huge swing if it's not something that's already included. If you're looking at, sometimes your condo units that maybe you're in Kansas that are a little smaller, it's the outside building maintenance is not included in the HOA due amount. Your utility, so obviously the exercise room, those lawn maintenance, management, parking, pool, snow removal, your utilities. So you kind of need to watch too. There's many a times that the building, depending on whether or not the hot water is fed to the entire building from one water heater or one system, water will be included or hot water will be included. Well, if your HOA due amount for that unit is higher, but our utilities are all included, that's something to consider as well. And that's a value to people. The other thing, property insurance, that's another one, and Amy probably can speak to that too in her experience, that it can sway things pretty between building to building and complex to complex. If the property insurance is included, then your client only has to get walls in insurance, which is a lot less expensive than getting insurance if it's already included in the property.
Also, if the building is tax abated, because there's some downtown that are tax abated, and that's huge.
Yeah, no, that is. Can you share a little bit more about, or do you want me to share a little bit more? That's a great point, Amy. That's a really great point.
Go ahead. That popped into my mind. So that's a value. If it's abated until 2030, that's 10 years of significantly reduced property taxes.
Yes. So sometimes in order to help encourage reinvestment into some of the urban core areas, they've gone in and provided tax abatement. So often, guys, you're going to see that there's tax abatement. A lot of times agents are going to share that in the showing instruction or showing agent area or in the overall general remarks. We'll go to the seller's disclosure in just a second. I'll show you where you can kind of get more info on what exactly is supposed to be included in the amenities. But the tax abatement can be where it was for a 20-year tax abatement. and maybe you've already gone through 8 of those years. So there's 12 years tax abatement left. Sometimes those tax abatement can be 50% of the taxes. So that's good to know too for resale purposes or for your client. If they know they're only going to be in the unit for 7 years and you've got 12 left on it, great. That doesn't make it, as big of a difference. If we're down to where we're in the last 3 years of the tax abatement, then they need to be prepared for the fact that their taxes are going to, double in that time. But those tax abatement, that does make a big difference a lot of times, and makes things more affordable for people to get into the unit. Okay, let me show you on the seller's disclosure. It's going to be very similar in many ways to the residential seller's disclosure. And guys, I apologize, in the room here, I've got a gazillion things up. So, and it'll share on here about the condo resale certificate. But if you want to continue to scroll down, you're going to be able to see where they have to spell out exactly what's included in the HOAs. Homeowner association fees cover, and then includes the amenities, and then the trash, security, hot water piece. And then you're also spelling out exactly what's the clarity around the parking.
One thing that came up whenever I was doing one was the pet policy for the HOA.
Oh, that's a great point.
Because I had some buyers who had larger dogs and then the building went out that way. And I can't remember, but I think she had to put it on here somewhere, like medium and small dogs only and cats only or something.
Yes, so it's a great point Amanda had shared too. It can affect the value and if animals are allowed or not. As if there's no animals, I mean, in good and bad, I guess, in some senses, but a lot of times that can be a limiting thing if only animals up to 40 pounds and only one animal or 2 animals up to 40 pounds. There's been times before people said, oh man, I really love the condo, and yet I have a lab that's 52 pounds. Is there any wiggle room on this? And often that can eliminate some buyers as well, and be something to be considering if you are assisting someone. Okay. I want to, one other piece that would affect, and I guess to point out on stuff is the transfer in. So be sure to have some clarity, and that again is listed on the documents for a condo, but clarity around if there's a transfer fee in. Sometimes that transfer fee, guys, can be significant. I don't know, Amy, you can tell me, but I've seen them before be $1,400, which could be a surprise for a buyer.
Shocking sometimes.
Yes. So, okay, let me hand it over if that's okay to you, Amy, and we'll talk a little bit about the lending side of things, if that's okay.
Sure.
Thank you again for your time this morning. I do appreciate it. Okay, I'm going to go back to sharing my screen. And guys, Kate and Stacy, if you guys have questions, feel free to continue to use the chat. Stacy, let's talk about assessments here in just a sec. I think that's a great idea. Okay. Can you all see that okay, or is this gonna, I wonder if it's gonna mess it up. Can you see it okay? We can, right?
I was like, yeah, I can see it.
Okay. I would just say go to slide 2.
Can you see it right now, Amy?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
I think we kind of just covered the purpose and value of what this class is. I had actually taught a class at Continental Title probably right around this time last year, so I just kind of pulled this from that one. But we've kind of gone over the purpose and the value of knowing exactly everything about that building. So if you want to do to the next slide.
Okay. Amy, we go through this. Oh, there we go. Now I'm going too fast. There we go. We're pausing. This is me and Nick every Tuesday, Amy, in our team meeting. Okay, go ahead.
There we go. Oh, okay. So single family residence lending and condo lending are 2 totally different things. Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac have a specific set of guidelines on what this condo building, this unit, this HOA has to follow, these guidelines, for it to be warrantable. And I think it's like 5 different pages, and it asks several questions But the things that we see most that will make a condo warrantable and non-warrantable is on an investment property. So let's just take the Manhattan, for instance. The Manhattan has over 50% of its units that are rental. So if somebody is buying a rental unit at the Manhattan, then that is going to be a non-warrantable unit. But if they're buying that residence as a primary, then it's a warrantable unit. So you have to be aware of how many units are in the community and how many are rented and know what percentage that is. When a new building, so let's just take Quality Hill, because you said Quality Hill earlier. Quality Hill is owned by a developer, and he owns, I think, still in the north of 80 units or so. Until he has 20% ownership or less, and until he has turned over control of the HOA, then that building is non-warrantable. Okay. If the HOA is currently involved in a lawsuit, then it is non-warrantable. And sometimes you guys will know about it and sometimes you won't. If the listing agent knows that it's in a lawsuit and they tell you guys up front, then you would know. But if it's not found out until the condo questionnaire comes back, then you wouldn't know and it would be a surprise. Let's see. Oh, yeah, this one, if the building has more than 25% of its total square footage as retail space, that would make it non-warrantable. If you want to go to the next slide.
And Amy, warrantable, non-warrantable, if it's non-warrantable.
Okay, so if it's a warrantable unit, then anybody can do the loan. Any lender in Kansas City, it doesn't matter because it's adhering to Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac guidelines. But if it's non-warrantable, you have to go with a specific lender that's going to keep the unit in-house or that loan in-house. And we're going to be the long time servicing because we, for our own guidelines, we don't adhere to Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac guidelines. We adhere to our own guidelines. And so they would be on our books and we would always service that loan instead of transferring it.
Okay. And also, so in that, Amy, does it, and it's kind of a building by building. So it's not, it's not easy for a client to know ahead of time if they're going to, the one that building or the unit that they fall in love with will be in a warrantable or non-warrantable building.
Right.
So much. Does it make a difference in their interest rate if it's non-warrantable? Does it make a difference in any of that? Would you say in your experience?
Okay, so a loan that I put together last week that she literally, the underwriter declined it 2 hours before closing. And she was putting 20% down and her interest rate was like 3.87, I think. But something to think about is we have a 30-year amortization loan, but it is not an interest rate that's fixed for all 30 years. We have fixed for 5 years, fixed for 7 years, or fixed for 10 years. So when I'm talking to a client, what I say is, okay, how long are you going to be in this unit? Okay, so if you're going to be in the unit for 6 years, we should be doing a 7-year interest rate that's fixed because it's fixed for all 7 years. And a lot of the time, it's a first-time home buyer that is moving into a condo. And of course, they're like, well, no, I probably won't even be here for 5 years. So when I talk to the people about what is your intention with this condo and how long do you really intend to live in it, and then we start talking about the length of time that the interest rate can be locked, the fact that it's an adjustable rate loan, but it's fixed for quite a long period of time doesn't ever seem to be a big deal to anybody.
Okay, so that I'm hearing you correctly, Amy, you're saying that if it's non-warrantable, Bank Midwest is able to still provide a loan, but the option then would not be a 30-year fixed loan. It would be some type of an ARM, sort of adjustable rate mortgage.
Right. So the one that she picked was fixed for the first 60 months and on payment number 61. And when it comes to an adjustable rate loan, just because it can adjust doesn't mean it will.
Right.
It can go up a maximum of 2% per year, 5% over the life of the loan, but it can go up 1/4%. It can go up 1/8%. It can go down. It really just depends on where the market is. So if somebody is in an adjustable rate, a 5-year ARM, and their interest rate only adjusts 1/8% or 1/4%, it might not be a big deal if they plan on moving within the next 2 years, right? But what I also always tell people is what we can do is if you are still in the unit and the interest rate does adjust to where you're not comfortable with it, you call me, we look at the unit and look at your specific loan details and see if it might be beneficial to refinance. Or let's just say Oak Ridge Meadows. It's one that's in a lawsuit. This is the one that came to me last week. They're in the middle of a lawsuit, and I would expect that it's been going on for at least 18 months, maybe longer, and it is going to go to court. And I would assume that it's going to be done within the next 18 months or so. So if you're still in the unit and it becomes a warrantable property, at that time you might want to call me and talk to me about refinancing.
Into something that's warrantable at that point. Yeah. You can also
watch. Really, it also goes back to what is your long-term goal with this unit? If you're going to be in the unit for 5 or 6 years and we put you on a 7-year ARM, the interest rate is still very, very competitive, and it might not ever make sense to refinance it. So every scenario is different.
Yeah, I could definitely see that would be an option, or make a difference kind of with what like you say, the goal is for your client in that unit. Right. Okay, let me continue on here.
So yeah, that was the next slide, the difference between, it's okay, don't worry.
The difference
let's see, so the developer, the lawsuit, not turned over control of the HO. The big one. Okay, so as you can imagine, so when the developer owns less than 20% of the units, and when they've turned over control of the HOA, then it's going to be on just those two aspects of it, a warrantable community for life, because the developer's never going to re-own it, right? But when you talk about the lawsuit, and another thing that Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac require is that the specific insurance policy that the community carries for its master policy, there has to be a certain level. It's called a fidelity crime policy, which basically ensures that anybody who has access, all the people that have access to the money that's in the HOA reserve budget are insured. And I've had a couple that they didn't carry enough insurance, and so it was non-warrantable because of that. But then another one is if they have to have a reserve account that's equal to 10% of their budget. So that's something that we look at too when we are getting all of our condo docs. So how they insure the property, if it's in a lawsuit or not, and if it is, if they have 10% of their budget in a reserve account, those three things can go in and out all the time, like an ebb and flow back and forth between warrantable and non-warrantable, and you'll never know it. You'll never know it until we get all of that information and we look at their budget, their reserve, their insurance policy. Tim Presco insures a lot, like probably 99% of the buildings downtown. And he does a pretty good job of advising what should be on the policy, but that doesn't mean everybody listens to their agent on what they insure. But those three things can have it could have been warrantable 6 months ago, but then they could have had a really high expenditure for maybe
Interesting.
uh,
Resurfacing
roof
parking
repairs or
garage.
something, right? Fixing roof repairs or just something you never really know what expenditure that they could have that would deplete their account, and they have to fund their reserve account again. That one gets that one's a lot. That one is actually the most common that I see, not the lawsuit one. It's the not having 10% of their budget in a reserve account.
Very, that's helpful. That's very helpful. Amy, I was not aware of that before. What I hear you saying too, though, I guess, Amy, and do you have people that you work with regularly that maybe would have a client that is in a building that does flip back and forth, that kind of watches those different factors? And when they get a window of opportunity where the building is warrantable, do you see that people watch those things to where then they're going to say, okay, it's a good window for us to list it so that we have
like the lawsuit for sure. Because remember when JJ's was across the street and there was that big explosion? Yes. And the building across the street was damaged, and they weren't being sued. They were suing somebody, but they were still in the middle of a lawsuit. So people that checked when that building was out of a lawsuit, they definitely refinanced because those were some pretty expensive units. And the people in that building were more like 40s and up. It was kind of an older crowd who knew that they were going to be there for a long time. So making sure that it was a fixed interest rate was important to them when it was available. So, I mean, yeah, I would say people definitely, when it's the lawsuit one, for sure, because lawsuits don't usually take as long as the one at Oak Ridge Meadows takes, for sure. Or the one across the street from when JJ's exploded. And to be clear, just because it's not warrantable doesn't mean someone can't get a loan and it's not resellable. It's just something that as a listing agent, as a seller, you're just, you have to be aware of. And often to you guys, I find that it's important that you're aware of it as a listing agent and that you're disclosing that to your potential buyers for a couple different reasons. One, not to waste everyone's time, so that you're not accepting a buyer that doesn't feel comfortable doing an ARM and doesn't want to go with something that is non-warrantable, and then you're under contract with them for 3 weeks. Would you agree? I mean, I would think that you would, that would be one reason, but it is somewhat as a listing agent, your responsibility, if you are aware or should be aware, that you are disclosing that. The other thing where I've seen it come up a lot with the percentage of ownership are downtown. There's a number of buildings that back in 2007, 2008, they went in and gutted apartment buildings and went to convert them all to high-end condos or to condos. Well, then when the market crashed, those developers went and rented out a lot of those units. And now slowly they might very well be going on and putting on like 2 or 3 at a time. As people move out, they then list them for sale. And so those buildings, it's kind of an odd thing to walk into, to realize that this one's non-warrantable. And even though it's not a brand new building, but there's ownership there from it being rented out, that rental amount, A, the developer owns too many, and then B, the rental percentage would be a factor. Some that are still non-warrantable downtown, like off the top of my mind, 509 Delaware and 510 Delaware. For that reason, the developer owns too many of the units. And again, we'll go back to Quality Hill. They own too many units. And so Quality Hill, Amy, because there's Quality Hill and then Quality Hill Square. Is it Quality Hill Square? Isn't it? It's Quality Hill Square. Is that what that gets the?
I think Quality Hill just started selling like a year and a half ago. They're trying to get it. There was 2 different, like there was an income restricted units that they've been flipped now and are trying to sell. But like Quality Hill as a whole, that renovation went on like a decade ago where they sold those. So it's kind of like but is that all grouped as one, Amy? Yes, it's all part of the same HOA. Okay, good to know. Good to know. The other thing that I was going to say would be, and I've run into before as well, is if there is an investor in smaller units. So in your HOAs that you only have maybe 3 buildings,
and there's a smaller number. There's ones that are an investor does own too many units, to where one investor has gone in and bought up some units and they own 3 or 4 of those units. 4509, or it's right off of Mill Creek.
Okay.
Those buildings that overlook Mill Creek, they're 8-unit buildings, and they pay the taxes for the units, but then somehow an individual has gone in and bought so many of them to where they kind of control the swaying of that warrantability. It's where you've got to, that would be something to be aware of. But okay, very helpful, Amy. Do you want me to go to the next slide?
Yeah, and the next slide is, again, just kind of like a breakdown of things to think about. What makes it an eligible characteristic for a warrantable condo. So you can go to the next slide. Back one.
Oh.
Well, I guess how to know. Okay, so the one I want to look at is the one how to know the difference.
Yep, I think it might be a little delayed. There you go.
Okay, so the thing that you can look at up front is the Missouri Condo Resale Cert, because that right there is going to tell you what they have in a reserve account. You might not know their budget, but if their reserve account has $124,000 in it, you can feel pretty safe, right? You might not know if it's in the middle of a lawsuit, but you're going to know if it's the train of thought just gone. You'll know the reserve account, but then if it's not a building that you're familiar with, like if you didn't know that 509 Delaware was non-warrantable only because the developer owns more than 20% of the units, if that wasn't shared with you, then that would be a surprise to you. So most of the time, I would say half of the loans that I do are that come to me just naturally because so many real estate agents know me, because I do, so many condo loans, I guess, if you will. So about 50% of my loans on condos are natural referrals. And then probably the other 50% are, they literally got it 2, 3 or 4 days before closing and the underwriter has declined it. So just yeah. And so the next slide is what the condo questionnaire looks like.
And if you want, I don't have a copy of it, Amy. So you can, and I apologize for interrupting you. So the resale certificate that you referenced before is what I've got here for everybody to see. And that's something that we should have access to, and you can ask the listing agent for. And as a listing agent, you should be getting that completed by the HOA when you go to list the property.
Right, just like it's a seller's disclosure.
Just the same part as the seller's disclosure. And it's going to say in here what the assessments are for the unit, if there are any common expenses or special assessments due that are coming up. Now, if there's times where it might be coming up here 3 months, 4 months from now, that makes a difference. And you might want to ask for meeting minutes, and that's another level of protecting your client by asking for meeting minutes so you can read in to see if there's a special assessments coming. But then this is where she was talking about how you're going to see what their reserves budget up, and it goes through kind of what all of those different questions that she had said. Are there any pending suits piece? So that's the piece that should be in the seller's with the seller's disclosure under supplements in the MLS. Some homeowners, you do have to pay for, a lot of times now the HOAs are charging homeowners for these condo resale certificates. And so sometimes homeowners will wait until they get an offer before they will request it from their HOA. I don't know that that's best practice. Some lenders will, is there a timeline in which, or time in which these become outdated to where as a lender you would want a new one if they list? No?
No.
Okay, and that there isn't any red flag, but I would look at when it was completed. So that's something as a buyer's agent, you want to make sure to say, okay, was this completed 6 months ago when this unit went on the market, or has this been completed within the last 30 days? And I want something more.
But so that is for that's more for you guys getting that information up front. But for me, when I do my condo questionnaire, I get basically a lot of this information over again. I get the budget, I get the reserve, I get the lawsuit. So this will never be outdated for me just because I get my condo questionnaire.
Okay,
But
so this is more to give people
helps you
before they've been, yeah, so this is to kind of give you a general idea of the status of things, so you're not investing time and making an offer and looking at a condo if it's to try to find out later. I will say that they do charge, the HOAs often will charge on what your turnaround time is. So if you go in and you say, I need this filled out, and if I can get it back in the next 7 days, that's great. It might be a $25 charge. If you say, I need this filled out and returned to me within 48 hours, it might be a $250 charge. So do know there is some relationship between how quickly you need it back completed. And that would be something in your timing of when you're putting it on. I think it's best practice to be putting it on the market with the condo resale cert filled out.
I would agree.
I apologize, Amy. Then let's go back to your presentation that has the condo. So that two different documents, resale certificate gets listed and you should have access to. The condo questionnaire. Amy, who requests that? And you request it from the HOA?
Right. So in the seller's disclosures, it gives us who the HOA contact is, and we request this before we even order the appraisal. And that is not, I can tell you that most lenders don't do that. And that's what ends up biting them. And that's what ends up making it to where nobody reviewed it before the appraisal is ordered. So the appraisal gets ordered and nobody looks at anything until it's looked at by an underwriter. So, I mean, I'm so familiar with so many of the buildings downtown that I know what is down there. But if it's a building that I've never worked with, as soon as the condo questionnaire comes back, I'm going to look at the questionnaire, I'm going to look at the budget and the reserve account, and the master policy, just to kind of give it a glance, and then we'll order the appraisal. Because like I said, we don't care if it's warrantable or non-warrantable. We don't even care the reason why it's non-warrantable, but we still have to have this. Even if I know that it's non-warrantable going into the deal, we still get this. It's still a requirement. But if I talk to a client that's looking in a building that I've never worked with before, usually what I do say is, and I talk to them about the difference in condos when I'm speaking to them up front, is, difference between warrantable and non-warrantable, and we don't care. And I assure them that no matter how the condo questionnaire comes back, we can do the loan, but it's just a different type of product. But if it's a building that I'm not familiar with, we say we're going to start out as the regular conforming type of loan. And as soon as that condo questionnaire comes back, and usually it does take, 2, 3, 4 days, depending on how fast that, if they're not on condo certs, we have to pay like $250. And we usually have it back within 24 hours. But if they're not on that, then, it can take 3, 4, 5 days sometimes. But we will wait until the condo questionnaire comes back before we order the appraisal.
Okay.
Because
And
all
Amy,
of that information is in there.
you say that so is that cost for the condo questionnaire? Is that something that's passed on to the consumer?
Yeah, it's on the buyer's side.
Say it again, I'm sorry.
It's on the buyer's side.
Okay, the buyer pays that as a part of their closing, as a part of their closing cost. Okay.
Right.
Excellent.
And it's a very, so like Soho, I've done so much in Soho or at Fountains that they don't even charge me anymore, because I personally got several of those buildings that are managed by KC Loft Central, that they don't charge me for a condo questionnaire, but they probably charge somebody else for a condo questionnaire. But yeah, this is in every file. And if more lenders and originators understood how condo loans work and how it is this condo questionnaire that's going to make or break the deal. It's really nothing else, but they just don't look at this document. Point in case where 2 hours before closing, it got declined. And it's, if they would have just looked at the condo questionnaire day one, they would have known.
Yeah.
So now she moved from Arizona to Kansas City and is now in a hotel for the next 3 weeks.
Until you can get it closed. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think that that's one thing too. Often you'll have clients like, no, I really want to use my credit union. I really want to work with my credit union, and being able to speak that, okay, but no, we may need to very well switch this if you find a building that, and they're going to say that they can do it, but if they're not,
all the time.
There's
Community America.
Yeah.
Community America is famous for saying they can do it. And then I can't even tell you how many loans of theirs I pick up. It's shocking.
But it's something that as an agent, you want to make sure that you're staying ahead of that conversation with them to say, hey, just so you know, like this building looks like it's going to be non-warrantable, and I don't want there to be a surprise when it switches to, you know, when it may need to switch to that.
Right.
And to really encourage them. I think with most condo buyers, like Amy had said earlier, it's important to find someone that can do both the warrantable and non-warrantable, so that we're not trying to, wait till they can start with that relationship from day one, instead of having to try to switch it down the road.
Yeah, because it's starting all over from scratch for me. And I can tell you that the listing agent knew that it was non-warrantable. He and I talked before he ever listed it. He told her that she needed to use me. The buyer refused. She wanted to use an online company.
Oh, geez.
Right. And he made her put in the contract that when the deal fell through, that she couldn't just back out of the contract. She had to flip her loan over to me.
Oh, that's smart.
Yeah. And when I talked to her last week, oh my gosh, I was considering not doing the loan because she was so rude to me. I mean, it was shocking. And I'm like, hey, I'm just here to save the day. And when I told her it would be a month, she was
Not happy.
very rude. And I was just like, well, I don't know what to do.
That's a good point though too, Amy. And in working in the condo arena, I guess I keep calling it arena or market, there are a lot of agents that, like KC Loft Space, like Anne Marie, a ton of those, where those listing agents often will be very helpful, especially if they sense that maybe you are someone that hasn't sold a lot. But they will very well say, hey, I know Amy could do this. So don't be alarmed if there's a time that you make an offer and you're countered back with, we'll accept this. That's a great term as a listing agent to put in place, that we can't just cancel. You've got to be willing to go and work with someone that can get the deal done if we're going to go under contract with you.
But something to think about, like if you know that it's non-warrantable as a listing agent and your seller is using the sale proceeds from your sale, this purchase, to buy their new house, and that loan doesn't close, I mean, it's another 30 days. And so your seller is being punished.
Yeah. So that's where you really do need to be proactive too, as a listing agent, to better, understand those things and be asking those questions and looking at things on that side of things. And there's a lot of agents too, buyers agents, that would get frustrated to say, you should have known that this was non-warrantable building, because some of them are very black and white and being warrantable or non-warrantable.
Right. And I'll say this, I've worked at Bank Midwest for a little over 15 years, and we are highly competitive on interest rate and fees, highly. A lot of loan officers jump around from employer to employer to employer because they think that their rates and they're always going to get the better rate somewhere else, and they're going to get better fees somewhere else, and they're going to get a better income split somewhere else. And I'm telling you, I couldn't imagine somebody coming to me with an offer that would be better than what I have, just because I know I can do any portfolio product, not just on condo lending, but any portfolio product. It's like, for me, I always have a plan B if something happens and goes sideways on plan A. It's like, I kind of joke and say, I've never met a loan that I can't close, because we always have this portfolio side that if something pops up that is totally unexpected, I can still close the loan. It might look different. So yeah, and there's like the Kitty condo loan. just how some of our portfolio products work. Like if you have a person is interested in buying a condo or a house for their college-bound student, we don't have to call it a rental property, and we don't have to have them put 25% down. They can put % down. That just says condo tells. So think Branson, and most of the places in Branson are condo tells, and we can still do those. Our jumbo products are very good. Unique income, people that are asset rich, but monthly income, they can't necessarily support that because they just kind of take their income if they want to out of their asset accounts. Bank Midwest allows me to be creative. And it's like, I kind of say, if I would loan this person money out of my own pocket, it's something that I would take to the underwriting department to get an approval to do the loan for the client.
Nice.
So, yeah, but our rate and our fees are, you're not going to get better. I mean, it's very rare that I ever get beat on rate and fees. So if they're concerned that, they shopped this lender, and that lender has great rates, well, I do too, but I have a plan B that's available in case the unit that you happen to fall in love with comes back non-warrantable.
That you can switch to and to not affect closing as drastically to where it would be, and you're proactive about it to where if you write and is it a 30-day or a 45-day on condos that you would prefer for, or that you see as
okay, so here's another aspect of a condo loan. Okay, so the only way that you don't have to get a condo questionnaire is if it's PERS approved, and literally there's one in the whole state of Kansas and one in the whole state of Missouri that's PERS approved. So what we have to do, if it's a warrantable condo, okay, it actually goes to a third party outside of the bank that just reviews the condo documents. And we honestly get run through the ringer every single solitary time. And so a condo loan usually adds about an additional 5 days to closing. So if your normal closing is 30 days, add about 35, just because of the back and forth with this third party that gives the condo warrantability certificate. So think of it like mortgage insurance and how we send the loan out for mortgage insurance certificate. On a condo loan, we also have to send it to a third party, a totally separate third party, to give it the condo insurance certificate.
Okay, good to know.
Yeah.
Good to know. Okay, I have just a couple. If you guys have questions for Amy, please put them in the chat or unmute yourself. I wanted to talk a little bit more about budget as well. When you're looking at condos, often your client will say, hey, I'm looking up to $250,000 for a condo unit. It is your job, and it's incredibly important as an agent to be a good advocate for your client to say, hey, hold on, let's talk about monthly payment. Because there's, just like with individual single family, you're looking at taxes and how much taxes can sway if you're looking at across a wide range of areas, how much that can sway that monthly payment. The same thing with an HOA due. So oftentimes when someone would come to me and say, hey, this is what I'm thinking for a condo, I would say, well, let me talk to you more about what your monthly payment is. That way we could back into it to say, okay, this $200,000 unit has 400 HOA dues a month. This same one that's maybe 175, but the monthly HOA dues are $750. And so often it was helpful to build even a little simple calculator to be able to help level play what the actual amount is. I often too, when I was especially new at showing condos, on my showing sheet would go in and do those calculations, and then I'd be prepared for that and write it up in the top right-hand corner of every property I was showing, so that I could say, okay, the asking price on this one is $209 and the monthly HOA dues are this. So this one's, your monthly payment's going to be right around this amount. And then we walked into the next unit. I could say, well, this one's listed at, $260 And yet the HOAs are less, your monthly payment, it's going to be a difference between the last one of like, you know, $300 or $200 in your monthly payment. But I would talk to them more on monthly payment, especially those that are not as savvy. Like Amy was saying, sometimes you've got first-time home buyers that are out buying a condo. Having that number and being able to have that conversation with them in the unit is really helpful as well. The other the other piece is that transfer in that I mentioned before, that those fees can sometimes be significant to as a transfer in, or a move-in fee is another surprise fee sometimes. So you've got your transfer to the HOA and a move-in.
And usually what they're going to do is like, so let's just say the HOA dues are $389. Right? So there's going to be a $380 admin fee. There's going to be a $389 move-in fee. Then they might collect 3 months worth of the HOA dues up front. I mean, so it can be pretty shocking. And so that's something that needs to be clarified. And here's the deal. I don't get told that, because it is the title agent that connects with the HOA manager, and she gets that information. That when we do the condo questionnaire, that the HOA does not send me that information. So if you guys get that information up front, and you would, sometimes I see that it's disclosed in the seller's disclosures, and sometimes I don't see it accurate.
Because the homeowner doesn't always know, Amy, too. I think that's partly why, she's on the seller. I was looking for it because I know I'd seen it before, but it's on the seller's disclosure. And a lot of times the seller, I mean, if they bought the unit 4 or 5 years ago, they don't even remember that. And they're not going, oh, wait, yeah, there is a move-in fee. So that's another like surprise that might, or box to check, or something, a question to ask, so that your client isn't like, whoa, my costs are like, $1,400 higher than what I was expecting. And such.
Right. And trust me, I have seen that. And sometimes I get surprised.
Yeah. The other piece, so in the seller's disclosure and on this Missouri condo resale certificate, as you can see, the required attached documents are to be a copy of the bylaws, rules and regulations, guys, the balance sheet, income statement, operating budget, insurance statement, all of those things are supposed to be attached to that. Now, whether they are attached is another thing. But no, it is important for you to, as painful as it is in showing condos, especially if you're not familiar with the different buildings, to take the time to read those those bylaws and rules and regulations. Other things that are helpful in knowing, it can give you, asking for the meeting minutes is something you can do as a buyer's agent as well. And as Stacy pointed out, any upcoming assessments, sometimes that's where you can identify that there might be assessments that aren't necessarily 3 months out, but are in like Western Autos building has a number of assessments that are kind of in the works, but they're a little bit further out. And so if you're not good to know, you don't know to ask about those, you could be surprised with an assessment. And often when an assessment is put on a building, that that unit owner can either pay a one-time sum for the assessment, or they have the option to spread that assessment out over a specific amount of time, with a cost involved in that. But those are, I mean, when there's an assessment on a building, like everybody's responsible for paying that assessment. And that is something to warn your client about as well. I think
and those assessments, here's what I want to say, is those assessments are usually to replenish that reserve account. Okay. And so that's why that reserve account might have dropped below 10% of the budget. And so if somebody, if they just went through an assessment, right, and only a couple of the unit owners paid for that assessment up front, and the rest of them chose to spread it out monthly, it could take a really long time to replenish that reserve account.
Good. Oh, that's a good point. That is a good point. No, thank you. That makes a lot of sense as to why that would make a difference too when those assessments come in. With the assessments as well, guys, in contracts before, it's been negotiated that the seller pay an assessment that might be pending or coming up. And that's something that you can write as a negotiation if it makes your client feel more comfortable that the seller was going to, pay such and such assessment. So note that there's ways to get creative in your contract to protect your clients. and or make your listing more appealing to buyers. So there's ways to get creative there. If you find yourself in a situation where you need to help your client either sell something or they really love a building and want to be in somewhere, but you've bumped into something like that, there's ways to get creative there. I want to be thoughtful of people's time. One other thing to talk about is construction. So many of you might have clients that want to go put their own personal touch on something when it comes to a condo. There are restrictions around construction in a condo building, and it's important to be aware of that. Some of it would be that there's only certain hours of the day that it's allowed for a contractor to come in and do work. Some of it is that you've got to schedule it because they're using the elevator. So you've got to schedule that in advance. You've also got processes and things that you have to do as far as like if you're doing any plumbing work. Sometimes if the building, all of the water is controlled by the building, you have to turn the water off for the entire building. So there's additional processes that go into place there, as well as the condos might very well require drawings by an architect, depending on the level of things, the insurance of the contractor. So just note when you're showing condos, it's not necessarily I can get a handyman in here and we can do stuff and it's no big deal. It is much more of an undertaking to go in and do renovation projects on a condo. I don't know if you'd have anything as a lender, Amy, to add to that on as far as renovations.
No, but yeah, I mean, that's an excellent point. Like, very good point.
So there's just, if you've got one of those buyers that wants to go in and take down walls and really make it their own, even if it is like paint before, I mean, there's been times where that painters had to be approved by the HOA, and it was, and little things like that. But that's something to consider if you've got someone that's like, oh, I love this building and I'm going to make it look like this Pinterest board I have, to warn them. So, okay. Any other questions we can help ask? Otherwise, thank you, Amy, so very much for your time. I greatly appreciate it. You've been someone I've referred my clients to over the years, and have had our agents turn to help with their condo buyers. So
Well, thanks for inviting me.
yes, thank you. Thank you. Thanks, Kate. Thanks, Stacy, for joining us. I will post this and share. I'll share the link to you with you too, if you'd like, Amy.
Okay. Yeah,
Thank
thanks.
you. Appreciate
Bye-bye.
it. Have a good day.
You too.